In the beginning of the story, we are shown a ship coming out of the sea. On the same ship, we meet Deputy Marshal Edward Daniels, a member of the Navy's naval duty. Edward Daniels' nickname is Teddy. At that time, Teddy was looking at himself in the mirror. Due to sea travel, he was very sick. He was talking to himself and comforting himself. When he feels better, he comes to the deck and meets Chuck. Chuck was actually the new partner of the marshal, who was being brought to a place called Shutter Island to work on a case. Since this is an island, ships are used to come and go. Shutter Island was America's biggest mental hospital where the most dangerous and completely mad patients were kept. Those patients had done some terrible things because of their madness. Anyway, after some conversation, Chuck asks, "Are you married?" Teddy says his wife died in an accident because of a fire. For a few moments, Teddy goes into his wife's memories. Teddy's wife's name was Dolores. When he comes out of the memories, Chuck apologizes to him, saying he's sorry for Teddy's loss. He gives a cigarette to Teddy, and both of them talk about their new case. The captain of the ship tells Chuck and Ted that this is the only way to go and come back to the island. When they reach the island, they meet the deputy warden. The warden takes them to their destination, which is the same, asylum. Teddy notices that it looks more like a jail than a hospital because of the strict security arrangements. Every patient present here is actually a criminal, but mentally, they are not right. The warden explains some rules to both of them and takes their weapons. There were 3 wards here. In Ward A, men were kept. In Ward B, women. And in Ward C, the most dangerous patients who could harm the rest of the patients. Teddy did not want to give up his gun. But according to the rules of the warden, he takes Teddy's gun. While watching the movie, viewers will understand these small details. For example, like when Chuck was handing over his gun, he could not take it out easily. The warden explains everything about this place to both Teddy and Chuck, detailing what to do and what not to do, and how work is conducted here. He also tells them about Ward C, where the patients are very dangerous. Without permission, they cannot go there or even ask anyone about it. While walking around, Teddy feels that many patients are watching him. A woman with strange eyes seems to be signaling for him to stay silent. Now they meet Dr. Cawley, who tells them about his work and says that in this hospital, there are 66 patients. The job of the doctors here is to treat and take care of them. All these patients are suffering, and we want at least to give them peace and rid them of that pain, he says. Teddy interrupts him and declares that they are all criminals who have been punished by being sent here. Why do people want to give them a peaceful life, he asks. The doctor does not answer this question directly, but instead tells Teddy and Chuck about the case assigned to them. A patient named Rachel Solando has escaped from this hospital. She killed her 3 children and drowned them in a pond. But Rachel Solando claims that her children are still alive. Dr. Cawley says that Rachel believes they are her neighbors and refuses to accept that she's in a hospital. She thinks she's in her house and that her children are alive. As soon as Teddy sees Rachel's picture, he's struck by strange memories, like visions of frozen dead bodies. Throughout the story, Ted experiences such odd dreams that neither he nor the audience can fully understand. It's clear only that he sees his wife again and again, remembering when a building caught fire and she died. Now, both Teddy and Chuck are brought to Rachel's room. Chuck sees that Rachel's shoes are left there, so he guesses that without shoes, she can't run far, and they should be able to find her. Teddy also finds a paper on which was written, "The Law for a 67. Dr. Cawley says that the writing is Rachel's and that it must have some meaning, as she is very clever. However, he keeps the note with him. The scene shifts to the inner roads of Sinai, where the search for Rachel is going. Teddy and Chuck are with the warden. Teddy asks if anyone searched for her in the caves, but the warden says that it's impossible for a person to go there, so he doesn't look in the caves. The strange thing is how this patient, Rachel Solando, managed to disappear from a place with such strict guards, without shoes, and with the door closed from the outside. The island is not so big, and she can't go anywhere. So this riddle keeps us entangled in a very complicated mystery. Then, Teddy asks the other staff what their routine was the day Rachel ran, and what they saw. They find out that Dr. Shehan was doing special treatment for Rachel, who is now on leave, and it is not possible to meet him. It will take time for him to come back, and because of a storm, he can't return at night. Dr. Cawley calls Ted and Chuck to his office for a drink. Ted also wants to question the doctor, so he agrees. As soon as Ted enters his office, he again experiences some strange memories. In the cold weather, he sees prisoners in a bad condition from the cold, and he gets lost in the truth as if he's lost in his memories. After seeing all this, he returns to reality. Dr. Cawley introduces them to his doctor friend, who is actually in charge, Dr. Nearing. Upon hearing Dr. Nearing's voice, Ted feels like he has heard it somewhere before. Nearing tells him that they both took part in the war and talks about violence. While discussing the war, Ted again gets lost in his memories. He was in a Nazi headquarters where an officer was shot in the head and was in agony. After coming out of this nightmare, Ted asks for the files of Dr. Shehan and other staff, but Nearing refuses. Ted gets angry, so Cawley says that they had already told him, but he refused. Ted then speaks to Dr. Nearing in German, but the conversation is left unfinished. Dr. Nearing was German, and Ted hated him, especially for what the Nazis did. Ted gets angry and declares that the investigation is over, saying, "We will leave tomorrow." That night, he is housed in the servant building. Chuck asks, "Are we really leaving? Because I have not left any case incomplete." Ted responds that they will change their decision. While sleeping, Ted sees his wife in his dream, who tells him, "You are drinking again." She says that he cannot leave like this and utters some weird things. Then she slowly starts to change into ashes, saying, "I am here with you, and she is also here." Ted asks, "Who is she?" Dolores replies, "Andrew Leadis," and says he will not leave until he finds her. Then Dolores slowly changes into ashes and disappears completely. The night passes, and Ted wakes up from the same nightmare to find the weather is very bad that day. Heavy rain and a storm have surrounded the island. Ted and Chuck go to Dr. Cawley and ask for his permission to question the patients who were in the session with Rachel Solando. Dr. Cawley allows them, and Ted questions many people. One of them is a female patient, Mrs. Keene, to whom Ted asks questions about Andrew Leadis. She writes something in Ted's notebook and gives it to him when Chuck goes to get water. After this interrogation, Ted talks to Chuck about the place, saying that Cawley is hiding something from him. Chuck asks, "Who is Andrew Leadis?" Ted explains that Andrew used to work in the building where he lived. He was a crazy guy who loved to play with fire, and because of him, the building caught fire. Many people died. My wife died in that fire. So when this case came to our department, we were not able to find Rachel. Because Andrew Leadis was brought here, and I'm sure he's kept in Ward C the next day, they search for Rachel again, as it's not easy to escape from the island. During this time, Ted shows Chuck that a woman has written "Run Ward" in his notebook. Then suddenly, a stormy rain starts. They find themselves in the jungle of the island, and to save their lives, they take shelter in an old church. While waiting for the storm to stop, Ted tells Chuck about the battle in which he fought, meaning World War IE. Ted says, "We attacked a German base. The Nazis there had weapons, but they had done more than enough oppression to the Jews. Their corpses had frozen. We put all those German soldiers in a queue and killed them." So Ted thinks that the same thing is happening on this island. All the doctors here are performing dangerous experiments on the patients, just like the Nazis did on the Jews. Ted continues, "Do you know who does the funding here?" He also tells the story of a man named George Noyes. He was sent on a mission to collect special information, maybe about this place, but he was caught in the war zone for a few months, and when he was released a few days later, he killed 3 people. He was brought back here because these people had made him like this, like a living corpse. Often when Ted sees a Jewish prisoner or corpses or the suffering Nazi officer, he remembers his past, but Ted has a lot of things hidden in his mind. He'll put all of them into confusion, and everything will become clear. Anyway, when these revelations were being made, Ted also began to doubt. He explains, "I think your coming here is a conspiracy. Maybe you want to know everything about this place. You have been brought here. Maybe you're a sick patient. This could be a trick to bring you here so that these people can make you crazy." After hearing this, Ted starts to doubt. Meanwhile, the guards come looking for him. Ted says to Chuck, "We have to leave from here." Anyway, he is brought to the hospital, where he's given dry clothes just like the patients there. Ted doesn't like it, but he wears it. Now, he needs to talk to Dr. Cawley, but he's busy in a meeting. The whole staff is worried about this. If a storm comes, how can they keep the patients safe because they can't leave them alone? Dr. Cawley wants to be freed, but Dr. Nearing doesn't agree. Ted comes forward, interrupting them, and asks Dr. Cawley about the sick patient, but Dr. Cawley says, "There is no sick patient. Didn't you get the good news? We found Rachel Solando." Ted is surprised. They both go to meet Rachel to talk to her. She seems fine, thinking that she's at her own home and her kids went to school. So Ted asks her questions in the same way. "Where were you yesterday?" Ted asks. Rachel doesn't remember, and looking at Ted, she feels like he's her dead husband. She slaps Ted. After this mental breakdown, they realize Rachel's condition. Returning to Dr. Cawley's office, Ted suddenly gets a migraine. His head aches, and the light disturbs him. According to Dr. Cawley, Ted needs rest. He advises him to take aspirin. That night, when Ted is taken to rest, he dreams again. He finds himself in the same concentration camp, in a pile of dead bodies, including a woman and her daughter. Then Rachel takes the place of the woman. She gets up and says to Ted, "You could have saved me. You could have saved us all." Ted finds himself in Dr. Cawley's office, where Rachel is with the bodies of her 3 children. Holding her daughter in his arms, she repeats, "You could have saved us all." Ted cries and says, "Forgive me, I was late." Suddenly, Ted reaches a pond where he sees Rachel and the bodies of the children. His eyes snap open, and he's back in his room, seeing his wife Dolores there, who says, "Andrew, lead us. You have to kill her," suddenly cutting off. Ted's eyes snap open again, but this time he is truly awake, realizing he was within another dream. Chuck rushes in to inform Ted that the hospital's backup generators have malfunctioned and the entire facility is in disarray. Many patients, or perhaps more aptly, prisoners, have escaped due to the havoc wreaked by the previous night's dangerous storm. Seizing this chaos as an opportunity, Chuck heads toward C. Meanwhile, Ted is ambushed by a deranged man, whom he ultimately kills in self-defense. As Ted seeks medical help for the injured patient, he stumbles upon a familiar face. George Noyes, the man from his earlier story. George, cloaked in darkness, recognizes Ted instantly. With a mixture of accusation and desperation, he reveals his disfigured face, saying, "You did this." He claims that the lighthouse serves as a lab where patients are subjected to peculiar experiments. Determined to help, Ted assures George he will intervene, mentioning his partner, Chuck. George, however, warns Ted, "This is all a game. You're just a rat in this maze." He questions Ted's trust in Chuck and insinuates that playing by the rules ensures the game is rigged against them. In a chilling turn, Dolores appears in the cell, but George insists she's in your mind. Don't listen to her. She'll kill you. Let her go. But Ted counters, "I can't do that." Emerging from the encounter, Ted's doubt grows, suspecting Chuck might be in league with the hospital staff. When he confronts Chuck about his whereabouts, Chuck replies, "I was looking into Andrew Ladies. The 67th patient is Andrew Ladies. You were right." However, As Ted sets his sights on the lighthouse, believing it to be Andrew's location, Chuck warns him off. We can't see the 67th patient without permission. We have to follow the rules. Ted's conviction that Andrew is being held within the lighthouse grows. He's neither in Ward A nor C. Chuck's reluctance to venture there and his insistence on adhering to the rules only fuels Ted's suspicions. In a burst of frustration, Ted confronts him. "You can't stop me," and makes his way to the lighthouse. Finding no clear path in, he returns to find Chuck gone, leaving behind only a lone cigarette. Disturbed, Ted's gaze drifts to the sea below. Ted's eyes catch sight of Chuck's lifeless body in the water below. Panicking, he risks his life to descend to the spot, only to find no trace of his partner's body, only a swarm of rats. Looking up, he notices a cave, illuminated from within. As he approaches, he encounters a woman, about 40 years old, clearly nervous. Ted reassures her that he means no harm. The woman claims to be the real Rachel Solando and reveals that she was once a doctor at the hospital, not a patient. She explains that she became a target after questioning irregularities in the medication ordered at the hospital, leading to her arrest and a false diagnosis of insanity. With no easy escape from the island, she's been in hiding, fearful of the illegal experiments being conducted there. She also warns Ted that he's likely been drugged, a claim that suddenly connects with the aspirant Ted had been given by the doctor. Resolving to leave the island, Ted promises Rachel that he won't reveal her location, understanding that she frequently moves to remain undetected. Upon leaving the cave, Ted is met by a warden who escorts him to the hospital. Once there, Dr. Cawley informs Ted that the day's meeting concerned a patient in Ward C who had been beaten severely. He mentions that George Noyes claimed the perpetrator was the same person who'd spoken to him earlier, implicating Ted. When Ted inquires about his partner Chuck, he's met with a shocking response from Dr. Cawley. "You came here alone. You had no partner." Ted's mind races as he realizes that the doctors could conspire to make it seem like he's gone insane, unable to cope with his wife's death. Resolute in his determination to escape, Ted incapacitates Dr. Nehring and sabotages a car, all the while haunted by visions of his deceased wife. His path eventually leads him to the lighthouse, where Dr. Cawley is already waiting. However, contrary to Ted's expectations, there is no sign of Andrew Latis in the lighthouse. Studying Ted's trembling hands, Dr. Cawley poses a pointed question. "You still have delusions and strange dreams." Ted is once again haunted by a vision of Dolores, urging him to flee. He tells Dr. Cawley that he met Rachel Solando in the cave, and she revealed everything to him. Cawley denies her existence, insisting that no woman named Rachel lives on the island. With trembling hands, Ted demands answers. Dr. Cawley explains that the shaking is a side effect of medication given to mental patients, and that Ted has been receiving this medication for the last 24 months. Unwilling to believe he's a patient at the hospital, Ted is shown a file on the elusive 67th patient, a file that reveals the shocking truth. Ted is that patient. The file describes a clever ex-military man who was a U.S. Marshal, a man with a penchant for violent fantasies, constructing elaborate stories in his mind and refusing to accept reality. This is Ted. Enraged, Ted throws the file aside and demands to know about his partner. Dr. Cawley begins to unravel the truth on a whiteboard. Edward Daniels is an anagram of Andrew Laetes, and Rachel Solando is an anagram of Dolores Channel. Ted's mind has fabricated these names. The 67th patient, Edward, Andrew, and Rachel, are all constructs of Ted's imagination. They represent his punishment and regret for an unforgivable act, one he cannot forgivable act, one he cannot forgive himself for. His mind has crafted a narrative to escape the truth. The story splits into two threads. One is the fictitious narrative woven by Ted, featuring Rachel Solando, strange experiments at the hospital, a missing patient, his partner, and a mysterious case. The other thread reveals the harsh reality. Ted is indeed Andrew Laodis, a former soldier and marshal. His wife, Dolores, was mentally ill and once set their apartment building on fire. Struggling with her condition, Andrew purchased a home near a pond and became an absent and alcoholic husband. His life was spiraling out of control, a fact his mind couldn't bear to face. Dolores' mental illness had made Andrew's life a living hell. One day, he returned home to discover that she had drowned their 3 children in the pond and killed them, heartbroken and consumed by rage. He was then brought to Shutter Island for treatment and has been there for the past 2 years. However, like a broken tape recorder, he continually replays the story in his mind, insisting that he is a marshal there to solve a case. Haunted by regret, Andrew created an imaginary world where he is a hero on a mission. Time and time again, he returns to this story, refusing to face the truth. Even as Ted, he clings to his alter ego, Edward Daniels. Dr. Cawley, growing weary of Ted's repeated denials, tells him that he wishes he could let him live in his fantasy world where he is a hero. However, he warns Ted that he is a dangerous patient, and the board has decided that he is a dangerous patient, and the board has decided that he must either accept the truth or undergo a lobotomy. Still refusing to face reality, Ted goes to Cawley's office, where he meets Dr. Sheehan, his psychiatrist. Dr. Sheehan informs him that if he doesn't return to reality, all the efforts to help him over the last 2 years will have been in vain. After absorbing all this information, Ted loses consciousness in the lighthouse. When he comes to, he sees Rachel, who is revealed to be his nurse. Dr. Sheehan and Dr. Cawley encourage him to express his feelings openly, urging him to face the truth. With a faltering voice, Ted begins to speak, his words a profound admission of guilt. "My name is Andrew Laodis. I killed my wife because she killed her children, but it was my fault. I didn't treat her. I didn't give her the time she needed from me. I didn't give her what she needed. I am the one to blame. All of this that I've been saying is just a fantasy." Then we see Ted sitting at the hospital entrance. Dr. Sheehan comes to him and asks him what he's going to do next. Ted responds, "I think there's something wrong with this hospital, and we have to get to the bottom of it now." "Doctor." Sheehan looks at Cawley, who is watching from a distance, a look of disappointment on his face. It's clear that Ted's treatment has not been successful. He's still trapped in his imaginary world, unable to accept the truth. They make the decision to force Ted to undergo brain surgery, which may erase all his memories. As they lead him away, Ted turns to Dr. Sheehan, who he still sees as his partner, Chuck, and asks, "What's worse, to die as a hero or to live as a monster?" Dr. Sheehan realizes that Ted has posed the question intentionally. He understands the truth about himself and what he's done, but he can't bear to live with the pain. He's signaling that he prefers his imaginary world, even if it means losing his grip on reality. At that moment, someone calls Ted from behind, but without turning back, he quietly leaves with the staff. With that, the story comes to a close.